Welcome to the Rock is George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit like, follow, or subscribe on the platform that you're listening to us on. You can also check out my work at the loudest.com on the planet, knac.com, for exclusive hard rock and heavy metal interviews, live show coverage, album reviews, and more. My guest for episode 189 is jazz guitarist BRIAN TARQUIN. Brian has a fun little project he's put together called BRIAN TARQUIN and His Heavy Friends. He joins up with notable musicians and fellow guitarists to raise money for various causes. Their latest release, Beyond the Warrior's Eyes, came out on January 19th. It honors the military soldiers that defend our freedoms, and the release's goal is to raise money for Hope for the Warriors. So here's BRIAN TARQUIN to tell you more about it. Today we're talking about your latest release, Beyond the Warrior's Eyes. It came out on January 19th through Downtown Music under the banner BRIAN TARQUIN and His Heavy Friends. It's a collaborative project, mostly instrumental. It honors the military soldiers that defend our freedoms, according to your PR material. Why don't we start off with how BRIAN TARQUIN and His Heavy Friends was formed?
Basically, I've had a few more releases before this, like under BRIAN TARQUIN and Heavy Friends. I did one for Guitars for Wounded Warriors, Guitars for Veterans, and I did one last year with Brothers in Arms. And now this one is kind of the fourth in the series, Beyond the Warrior's Eyes. So what I try to do is I get different musicians, guitarists to come in and help out and create new music in honor of our veterans.
The mission behind this particular release is to support charity, Hope for the Warriors. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what Hope for the Warriors does and how you first got involved with them?
Hope for the Warriors is a really kind of cool organization. They concentrate on Navy and Marine veterans and wounded soldiers, and they give all sorts of counseling, and they kind of rehabilitate them, and just everything from any kind of PTSD, mental kind of trauma, to physical trauma, and just trying to help families and them readjust to civilian life.
Were you yourself in the military or some family members in the military?
My dad was in World War II. He was a Marine out in the South Pacific, so I heard a lot of that. He was a Marine sergeant. And then, of course, growing up in New York in the late 60s, 70s, I saw a lot of Vietnam returning veterans, which really kind of was sad to me, the way they were treated at the time, and of course the way society was. And I did a short stint in the ROTC back in the 80s during college, so I kind of have a feel for everything. I've always had a soft spot for them.
And it's good that there's organizations and charities and people like yourself to help out, because it seems like the government, as time goes on, seems to put their money in what they think is important and not helping out those that serve for them.
Yeah, well, we see what the government has in their criteria, putting where their money goes. So it's a shame, but it should go back to the soldiers who, really protect our rights to what we do. But I try to people make aware of these organizations. In the past, I've used the Fisher House Foundation. It's just trying to get people's attention and to point them in the right direction, to make them aware that these charitable organizations exist.
You produced and engineered and composed all the music on the album, but the drums, how long does it take for you to put together something like this?
It's funny. On this one, I started in 2019, right before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic happened, everybody was on lockdown. So everybody had this time. So I was finding a lot of musicians were able to basically have the time at home and be able to do it. And everything was, a lot of that was done virtual because it was, during 2020, during 21, I got carried away. And so the album originally was 19 songs, which came out to be. And I didn't want to release an album that long because I felt like it wouldn't do justice to all the songs. So what I did is I broke it up into the heavier rock stuff, which was the Brothers in Arms that came out last year with like Joe Satriani and Vinnie Moore. And then I broke it down to this more jazz fusion with Jean-Luc Ponty and Eric Johnson. And so that's kind of how the whole thing came about.
You still have some heavy hitters on this. You got Chris Poland from Megadeth, and you have Steve Morse from Deep Purple. You still got some heavy guys involved.
Well, I meant heavy in the sense of music. So it was like more, the Brothers in Arms is really like more of a metal record, whereas the Beyond the Warrior's Eyes is more of a fusion, prog rock record. So I broke them into those two. Yeah, both of them have great heavy hitters. I'm really pleased with both of them.
It's funny you say the fusion thing because I don't think a lot of people know that Chris Poland, that's what he does now, and he's not the heavy metal guy he was back in the day.
No, it's true. It's true. Yeah, he definitely has changed. Yeah, his style.
You got a jazz violinist on this, Jean-Luc Ponty. I think he adds a lot to this, kind of makes things a little bit different than the other tracks.
Yeah, I really like Jean-Luc, and I always loved Mahavishnu Orchestra and all the projects that he was involved with. So I was really happy to be able to get him. There's another violinist on here. His name is Steve Kindler. He was Jeff Beck's violinist and Jan Hammer's violinist. And he's on really a groundbreaking record called Jeff Beck Live with the Jan Hammer Group, which came out in about 77, 78. And that's an incredible record. I grew up with that record. And he keeps up with those guys with trading solos through that whole live record. And it was great to have him on this. He's on a song called The Soldier's Journey, and I used the Budapest String Orchestra on that.
How does one recruit the Budapest String Orchestra for recordings?
Yeah, well, it wasn't easy, but I had to send them the tracks, and they sent me back 100 tracks that I had to sift through and go through. And compile them into the song. It was quite a challenge and everything, but it was a really good experience.
So was bringing in the guest musicians more like calling in favors to your friends, or did you kind of cold email people?
Well, I was having conversations with all of them at the time, so I kind of didn't cold email them, too many of them, because I have a show also called Guitar Tracks Radio every Monday night, and I interview a lot of these guys for the various shows, and so I began to have a rapport with all of them, and so we kind of got along, and they did similar music that I do, so we were kind of on the same ground with that.
So when you decide on, or when you have your list of people that are going to work on this particular project Beyond the Warrior's Eyes, do you present the music to them and they get to pick which song they think they can add to, or do you already have them in mind when you've composed the song?
Generally, I really custom compose each of the songs for them, for each of the guests, knowing their style and kind of where they like to go with everything. So I kind of wrote, when I wrote Beyond the Warrior's Eyes, the title track, I had Jean-Luc in mind for that because I thought he'd be perfect for that track. And same one with Steve Morse and John Tropea and with basically all of Eric Johnson with the Gates of Valhalla. And so it was kind of, I kind of knew what they did once I knew that they kind of were in it and wanted to do it. I kind of really custom wrote the tracks for them.
The final track on the album is These Colors Don't Run. It features Steve Morse of Deep Purple and the late PHIL NARO from TALAS and Lips Turn Blue. Phil passed back in 2021 from cancer, unfortunately. I know you guys had worked together in the past. This wasn't your first time working together. You did almost a full album with him, correct?
I did a number of things with a few albums because I did a Christmas album with him in 2018, 2017, and we did Orlando in Heaven, and he did a couple tracks on there, and then we did an album called Band of Brothers, and that was all vocals, and that was him as well. So we were working together a lot, and it was too bad that he passed. You know, he really passed from COVID, and you know, with his cancer. And this song I had, and I thought, you know, I'd never released, and I thought this would be such a great tribute to both Phil and, you know, our veterans, because I really like what he did. So, and Steve always loved him. He loved his vocals and everything. So yeah, and I thought it was a good way to end the record as well.
I thought a lot of good stuff came out with Phil after he passed. He had a final TALAS album. He had an album with Lips Turn Blue, which was something new he was working on. And then, you know, you have this particular song, which I think is great. How do you remember when you guys first met?
Yeah, I was turned on to Phil by Bumblefoot from Guns N' Roses. He said that you know, we would get along, and I was looking for a singer for one of the songs because I was working with Larry Coryell at the time on the Orlando in Heaven album, and that's how I met Phil. And there was another writer that wrote the lyrics to the title track, Orlando in Heaven, and I needed somebody who could really deliver it. And I gave it to Phil, and Phil did a great job. And then he actually went and wrote lyrics to another song on the album, Pulse 49. And then we kind of like, you know, formed this great friendship, and then started to work together, and kind of really worked out.
You recorded this album at your Jungle Room Studios. The first part referring to the studios is that a nod to Elvis, Jungle Room Studios?
No, no. It's actually just something I came up with years ago. And when I open up the studio, it's an interesting studio. It's a unique studio because it's a mobile studio, kind of like the Les Mobile by Guy Charbonneau, and who does a lot of mobile recordings, and the Rolling Stones, a mobile recording studio. That's kind of what I kind of based it off of. And I just wanted something that I could take anywhere, because I wound up moving around a lot in my life. And so, and I could just park it, plug it in, and we can just be set to go. It was actually designed to be a recording studio in LA and Southern California. And then I just finished it off with, you know, with a lot of classic, you know, analog equipment. So I did it basically, you know, most of this record actually was all done up in, at the time during the pandemic, I was living up by Woodstock, New York. And so I was there through the whole time, and I did the whole record there.
The second part of my Jungle Room Studios question was you recorded this all in analog, which, well, you initially recorded it in analog, and that's not something people do much anymore today.
No, I'm a firm believer in the sound of analog and the warmth of analog. And so what I wound up doing was I recorded everything initially, like the drums and the bass and rhythm guitars and analog. Then I brought it over to digital to be able to fly in the parts during the pandemic, because, you know, everybody was on lockdown, nobody could get around. So I had to be able to work, you know, in the digital, you know, kind of platform. And then I wound up mixing it back down to the analog, and they mastered it off of analog tape, so off a 1/4-inch tape. So yeah, I really like the way analog sounds, you know, for records, you know.
You're a guitarist by trade. When it came to recording this album, what was your guitar of choice?
Oh, I got a lot of guitars, especially on this particular one. I used a lot of different guitars because for different flavors. But I have a Les Paul, a custom white one that I used a lot on. It's a 97, I believe. And then I have I used a Larry Carlton, what was that one? A Sire H7, like a 335. And that's really actually a very nice guitar. It plays just as well as my 335s. And so I used that, especially on like the track of with Robben Ford, the Quiet Desperation. And I also used, I had a Jeff Beck Strat that I used, which actually had I had modded it and put in an Eric Clapton preamp in that one. Let's see, what else did I use? I used an SG, Gibson SG. I had a Gold Top three pickup LP, Gibson LP Gold Top that I used. I also have a Gold Top Deluxe, a 77 Deluxe, which are mini humbuckers. So I was using all sorts of stuff because I like on this particular one, there was kind of rhythm tracks I wanted to kind of mold into different flavors, different tastes. I kind of like use the whole crayon box. I use the whole thing, bring it, and be able to use all the different shades and stuff. Well, same with the amp.
So you say you have a lot of guitars. I've interviewed Jim Peterick, formerly of Survivor. He said he has 237 guitars. So how many guitars are in your crayon box?
Not near that many. No, I didn't. I didn't collect that. But I have a lot of amps too. So I use like the old Mesa Boogie Mesa 2s, Mark 2s, and then the Prosonic. I have a Plexi Marshall that's been modded. I have a great Fender. These a lot of Fender stuff too, like the Prosonic and also the Super Reverb, and some Fender, twin reverbs, Bassman, just a whole host of them, and a lot of Orange too. I like Orange amps, so I've used those, the Terror series, Dark Terror, the Tiny Terror, and of course I use the Pro, the solid state one, the Pro double channel one, which sounds great for solid state. It's probably one of the best sounding solid states you can get.
Is Beyond the Warrior's Eyes available in physical format, or is it just digital?
Just digital, yeah. Yeah, we're past the point of physical now. Yeah.
It's sort of making a comeback with vinyl, but I feel like the industry will ruin it.
But if you look at who buys vinyl, or if you look at actually what the vinyl albums that are selling, it's just the old stuff. David Bowie, Led Zeppelin, Miles Davis. Collectors usually buy it and they never use them. It's not like, the guy on the corner, with his band is going to, actually do vinyl, because vinyl really doesn't have a viable large audience for that kind of thing, like CDs used to, with the other formats. So, and today nobody even downloads. So we live in a streaming marketplace, and that's it.
Do you see this series that you've been doing as an annual series or a biannual series or something, or continuing series at that?
I'm not sure. I've done a lot of them, and I'm not sure how I would move forward with it. I possibly am working right now on maybe singles that would come out, but I don't think I'd do another whole record like that. It's a lot of work, and I've done a number of them. But currently, I'm working with Gus G and some other people that will have singles possibly come out, and that kind of vibe. So we'll see where it takes it. Now,
Gus G is really heavy, coming from Firewind. That's more on the power metal side of things.
Yeah, well, Ozzy is his famous moment, with everything, and. But yeah, I'm working on something with him now. So it's on a single. So, and I've been talking with some other guys, some old fusion guys like Percy Jones from Brand X, and so we'll see how we can kind of maneuver things coming forward.
As far as your solo material goes, a little bit different than what's on this compilation of music. You're a jazz fusion guitarist mostly, as far as your solo stuff is concerned. Your last album was Lo-Fi Jazz Hop Avenue in 2022. Are you working on any new material?
Yeah, I actually am. I just kind of worked with this 18-year-old kid who's a real lo-fi producer. And he's actually we just finished a track together, which is really kind of cool. It's a single called Jazz Tropolis. So that'll be coming out, I think, probably in the next couple months. So it's an interesting kind of lo-fi, kind of meets jazz vibe. So yeah, that's going to be fun to.
Do you play out live your solo material? I know it's wouldn't be possible to play the heavy Friends material.
Yeah, Heavy Friends is just I know a number of people have asked me that, but it's such a logistically challenging thing to do that I don't think it would be possible. I don't really play out live. I haven't for years, because just since before the pandemic, just because so much of what I do is in the studio and composing and producing. And unfortunately, jazz instrumental music or even fusion instrumental music, it just kind of like, it's not that popular any longer. And so I find the audience has shrunk a great deal. So there's not a lot of outlet there either. It seems like, back in the 90s, there was, they had huge jazz festivals and huge things you could actually do. But today it's kind of a different world we live in. So
I would think over in Europe, something like that would be well received.
I guess possibly, yeah. They're less on the refined jazz and more on, I think, more, on the bebop kind of, straight ahead stuff. So,
are you still writing for TV and movies? I know you've done a lot of work in the past. I see your 3 Emmys from All My Children there. You've worked on CSI, Seinfeld, and a bunch of other TV shows.
Yeah, I continue to work. Yeah, I work with Warner Brothers and Telepictures. I continue to do all sorts of score and all sorts of soundtrack. I have a catalog with APM, which is owned by Universal and Sony, and Sonaton, which is distributed by APM. They're the largest music catalog in the world. It's privately owned out of Germany, and they represent my catalog. My catalog is called First Choice Music, and so I'm always updating that catalog. All of my commercial releases go in there as well. So Beyond the Warrior's Eyes is in there, and for placement for television and film. And I'm always continuing to write with Hal Lindis from Dire Straits. He's a good friend, and we write together for the catalog and continue to build up everything. So that all keeps me busy and out of trouble. So.
You also mentioned your radio show Guitar Tracks on WFIT 89.5 on NPR radio, where you interview other guitarists Monday nights 10 p.m. to midnight. Who's tonight's guest?
Steve Hackett. Actually, I just saw him at the Orlando Dr. Phillips Center like a week ago, and it was great. He was fantastic, and his new album is really good. So basically, I have a great interview with him, and so that's and he speaks about the early days of Genesis, and because he was there from I think 71 to 77, so all the classic days of Genesis. So it's actually a very good interview.
In addition to composing music, you've written a handful of instructional books. Your most recent is The Survival Guide for Music Composers. What is sort of the crux of that particular book?
What I wanted to do basically is, a lot of people don't know how the music industry kind of works. So what I did was I said, listen, I want to, and so many people have asked me, because I came up through the trenches to the ranks from working at record companies and recording studios and on up as an artist and a record label and a producer. And so I wrote the book basically for people to read to see how it works. So basically it's stuff that never gets old, like how do you place music, or what really more importantly is the kind of like the blueprint of how to make money from the music. Like what is a PRO, you know, what is CSAC, ASCAP, BMI, what is Harry Fox, what are neighboring rights, what are, you know, all of these mysterious things that, you know, kind of when I got involved in the 80s, you know, there was like no real book written. There was like a book written by an attorney, a couple attorneys, very dry, very hard to understand. And so I wanted to write something that was really much easier to kind of focus on. And a lot of it is based on my personal experience with these companies and making a living through these different societies and royalties and so forth. So I really just tried to give the musician, the composer, you know, kind of a realistic view of if they're going to get involved with this, how and where to look for money sources. Because now today, you know, you have so many money revenues that you did back when it was just like a brick and mortar, you know, physical distribution. And you had distribution, record label, and you know, Harry Fox for that. And people didn't even think about placement. You know, they never really gave it a thought. They weren't serious about it. A lot of record companies, I've said this so many times, you know, were thought it was just kind of laughable to get something on television or to, you know, to do anything with film, or it was, you know, the business of selling records. And I get it. I understand that whole thing. But, you know, there was this attitude, especially in music publishing circles, that, you know, they were not going to take it seriously, and TV music wasn't good, and film music wasn't good. Their music was the only one good. And I find it very funny that these huge companies that once snubbed their nose at it wound up in the 2000s buying so many library catalogs because their business was doing so well and the record industry was doing so poorly, you know, with the you know, the onslaught of not having distribution any longer to Tower and all these companies that, you know, where were you going to sell your physical product? So you know, it's kind of like an overview of my whole kind of history of being in the music industry.
In your 30 plus years as a musician, had you ever been approached to join any established bands?
No, because I was not from that world. You know, it was, you know, I'm not from like, you know, a big band. You know, I came up kind of as a solo artist. So I never was in a band like that. You know, I was in bands certainly when I was a teenager, and high school bands and different bands, you know, on the Strip and stuff. But, you know, I wasn't really, you know, that kind of minded. And all those bands that were existing back in those days were all the hair bands. And so that kind of wasn't really my thing. Though they had great guitarists in some of those bands. But I kind of was always, you know, more in the fusion minded set. And so that's kind of how I was drawn to contemporary jazz, because when, you know, contemporary jazz instrumental music was the only thing around by the early 90s, because everything as far as rock instrumental and rock kind of was, everybody was sick of it, and it kind of ran its course. And, you know, like everything, they run it into the ground. And so people didn't want it. And there was, you know, you remember there's a huge backlash against guitar playing, guitarists, and guitar in general. And the only way I saw at that time to be a soloist and to be a, you know, kind of a, you know, guitarist, composer was to do the contemporary jazz it started out as NAC, new adult contemporary, and then they changed to NA to smooth jazz, which always to me was like they killed it when they coined that phrase, because they locked themselves in, and they wound up, throwing out all the great playlists of Weather Report and the early Pat Metheny stuff and so much stuff they wound up getting rid of because, it didn't fit into their smooth jazz margins, But, I was always lucky they liked my stuff. So, and they always played it, and I had a number of hits on it. But, it was a shame that, they made the margins so short, so narrow, and not being able to play other stuff and kind of narrowing your tone going that far,
Are you working on any other music projects right now besides working with the 18-year-old guitarist?
Like I said, Gus G, I'm working with him. Percy Jones, we're going to be doing something. Al Di Meola, I'm trying to get him on a new project. So I've got these things in mind, just got to, kind of see everybody's schedule. Now it's a little more difficult because everybody's on tour mode because everybody's post-COVID. So now it's, back to touring for everybody. And Steve Hackett told me that he's making up like things that were canceled during the tour was canceled during COVID. So this is like kind of his COVID makeup doing it. I think he's called it the Genesis Revisited.
Well, Brian, those are all the questions I have for you today. Your new album, Brian Tarquin and His Heavy Friends, Beyond the Warrior's Eyes, out now through Downtown Music. People can head over to your website, find out more about it, and make a donation as well. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me on the podcast and telling me all about yourself and the project.
Sure, thanks for having me. And just go to hopeforthewarriors.org, and then you could just give right to them directly. And they're a great organization. So, yeah, that's great. Thanks for having me. And, the album's doing well at radio, so we're really pleased. So.
Yeah, I saw that, and I thought it was a great album, and I wish you the best of luck with it.
Thanks so much.
Once again, I want to thank Brian Tarquin for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out the latest release by Brian Tarquin and His Heavy Friends called Beyond the Warrior's Eyes, out now through Downtown Music. Head over to your favorite music streaming app and check it out. When you're done listening, consider a donation to Hope for the Warriors at hopeforthewarriors.org. For all things Brian Tarquin, head over to his official website, briantarquin.com. I also want to thank Brian's publicist, Ann Layton, for making this interview possible. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. Discover your next favorite artist on the Rock is George podcast.